Welcome back. This is Excel Foundations number 2. So today we're going to be going over functions, which can be used to turn a large chunk of data, like what we're dealing with here, thousands of rows, into a few concise pieces of information. So I guess to just give a high-level overview of what a function does, it's really just a command or a little piece of instruction that tells Excel what to do. So you can almost think of it as writing a very basic bit of code that Excel then executes on. So I guess we can start with the most basic thing right here. So we're just going to do equals, and we're still working with our COVID-19 data that we were working with in episode number 1. And if you haven't seen that, I'll link the data set below. But so starting with our most basic function. So here we have an equals, and let's say equals G2. So that is telling us what cell we want. So G2, that's over here, G, row number 2. And it will display exactly what's in that cell. So we see Afghanistan, so that's the country displayed there. At the same time, if we want to simplify it, we could just go equals and then click on the cell that we want. So there we go, same thing. What we can also do is we can use equals to show a range. So let's say G2, and then we're going to do a colon through G5. And so it brings the whole range there. What we can also do, same thing, is we can just select them directly. So G2 through G10, we get the same thing. Come back up here. If we delete this cell, it's going to delete them all. So we can also get a range that goes horizontally as well as vertically. So let's say equals G2 colon, and let's go through J10. So you can see it selects all of those cells, hit it. And so here we have everything from G2 through J10. Awesome, so that's the most basic function. Remember, we're always going to use an equals at the beginning of all of our functions. Now, let's get a little more sophisticated with it. So a common function that you'll see used is a count function. So we'll go equals count. You can see this is a list of different functions we could execute on. We'll type out count, and it gives us a little explanation of what it does right here. So it says it counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers. So what we do from here, we have equals count. We're going to put a parenthesis at the end of it. So open, and then it's telling us what values to add. So a list of values. Let's look at cases. So we'll count the total instances where there's cases. So this isn't adding them up. This is just counting the number of rows where we see a value. Count, and we selected the whole column E, and close that out with another parentheses at the end, and we get 7,515 rows. So we can see if we look, we select it here, same thing, so 7,516, that's including the top row, which the count function isn't. If we scroll all the way down to the bottom just to confirm, should be right here. So yeah, 7,516 is our last row. So you can see that gave us a count. Now, if we want to get a little more sophisticated with it, so let's say I just want to count the number of instances where there was a case in the United States. So we'll do count, just like before, and we'll put an if at the end. So count if. And this, you can see that this says it counts the number of cells within a range that meet the given condition. So we can tell it to count the number of rows, but only if they specify a certain condition that we're going to tell it. So here, we're going to go with our range, right? So it's still going to be, what we're actually going to do is we're going to count all the instances here. Let's go to countries, because I want to see how many rows there are that have the United States listed. So we'll do range, we'll select the whole range, and then it's asking for a criteria. So that's very basic. We just input what we want to see or what we want to count for here. So like I said, we want the United States. So we're going to do quotations, and we know that United States is United States of America. If you watched the last video and they use the underscores, and you want to make sure that you get it spelled right, and then you're going to close out the quotations, and then you see we have to put the parentheses at the end. So what this is saying is count the number of rows that we see in column G to G if they say United States of America in them. And so we can see that there's a total of 90 there. And we can use that for anything. So let's say China. How many instances we see for China? Okay, also 90. And one more, how about Aruba? Okay, so there's only 8 in Aruba. So that's pretty cool. But let's take it a step further. So now let's say we want to know the total number of cases throughout the entire data set. So what we're going to use there is a sum function. So again, we'll do our equals. We'll say equals sum. So it adds the numbers in a range of cells. So add that parentheses again, and then we'll select, let's go with cases. So we'll select all of column E. And then again, we close it out with the parentheses. And we see that we have 657,140 cases. Now, if I select a column just to confirm that, we see our sum 657,140. So that gives us that breakdown there. Now, let's take it even further. So, we were trying to look at the number of cases in the United States. So let's do equals sum, and we'll do a sum if. So it's similar to the count if. So it adds the cells if a certain condition is satisfied. So this asks us for 3 things now: the range and the criteria. So it's the same as the count. So our range is actually going to be the countries, and the criteria that we're looking for in the countries will be United States of America. And then the last bit, so this is new, the last bit that it's adding for is the range to be summed. So we want to see the total sum of cases. So we'll click that, we'll close it out. So what this is saying, you can see it over here or up here, it's saying go through all the columns or all the cells in column G, all of the ones that say United States of America, take the number of cases, so E to E, and sum them up. So let's see. So there's a total of 124,665 cases in the United States. Now we can easily change this. So we see E to E is cases, F to F is deaths. So let's try that and see the total number of deaths that have occurred in the United States. So 2,191, which is sadly a pretty large number. Let's go back to E to E because that's not quite as sad. So E to E, and then again, so 124,000. Let's see what's going on in China. How many cases do they have there? Or actually Italy, because that's been hit pretty hard. So 92,000, which is less than the United States, but also proportionate to the population. It's a much higher percentage. So that's sum and sum if. Something else that we can do is max and min. So that's just taking the maximum number in all the cells. So let's start with min, and we'll select the number of cases. So it's just saying pull the minimum number of cases in the entire column, and it gives us -9, which seems like kind of a funny number. So let's add a filter here and see what's going on there. So there's the -9. All right, it looks like a definite outlier, but I guess that proves the point, of how the min works. So that's the lowest value in the entire data set. We can also do the max. So equals max. That's going to take the opposite. It's going to take the highest number in the entire data set. So we see that that is almost 20,000. So for one of the countries here, they reported 20,000 cases in one day, and that's the biggest single day increase that we've seen in any single country. And what we can actually do, sort this largest to smallest. So that's here in the United States, and that's actually March 29th, which is today. That's not good. But again, for the purpose of analysis, it's good that we're able to find that information so easily. So now moving on, something else that we can do is, let's say that we want to see the mean number of cases per day across all countries. We can do an average function there. So equals average. And then again, with our parentheses, and we'll go over and select cases, E to E. And close it out. And so the average number of cases across all countries for this time period is 87 per day. Now let's look at the average number of deaths. So that's going to be F to F, the adjacent column. So there's about 80 new cases a day on average, and there's about 4 deaths per day on average. So actually, if we want to do, so that's the average deaths. We want to see average cases. So that brings us back to that 80 number. And then we can do a little bit of analytics here. So let's do equals, and then we're going to divide the number of deaths per day on average by the number of cases per day. And that'll give us a rough estimation of our lethality. So you can see we're doing equals M2, which is our deaths per day. And then we do this dash, so that's saying divided by, and we'll do M1, which is our number of cases. So we see that that brings us to about, converting that to percentage, 4.63% of cases on average are leading to deaths. And that's obviously very fuzzy math. That's maybe not necessarily accurate, but gives you an idea of how the logic here works. Now, lastly, something I want to show you is if functions. And these are probably the most powerful functions that you will use in Excel. And so let's just plug it in right here. And there's an analytic that I want to run. I want to break this data out by just 2 factors. So I want to see which cases are domestic, so in the United States, and which ones are foreign, so any other country. Now we can filter, for just the United States. Oh, sorry, that's deselecting the United States. But what's going to happen is, all of these other countries are going to show up individually. I want to group them all together as foreign. So we're going to do an if function for that. So we'll name this new column here. We'll call it domestic with a question mark. And then we're going to do an if function. And so you pay close attention because these can be a little tricky to learn early on. What we're going to do is we're going to say equals if. And there's 3 things we have to plug in here. So there's our logical test. And so in this case, we'll select this cell over here, G2. If G2 equals, and then we'll say United States of America, then this is our second factor. So this is going to be, we're going to do a comma, and we'll say our value if true. So if G2 says United States of America, return the value domestic, and then our value of false. So we do a comma again, and make sure, again, everything is in quotations. Then we do a comma. And if it doesn't equal United States of America, we want it to say foreign. Okay, so we put that in quotations again, close it out, and then we put that parentheses at the end. So one last time, what this is telling us is if cell G2 says United States of America, which it doesn't, it says Afghanistan. But if it did, then we would see the word domestic here. But because it doesn't, it says Afghanistan, we'll see the word foreign here. And so let's run that. And sure enough, we see foreign. If we autofill it all the way down, we see that all of these are returning foreign because they're all not the United States. Let's format this. And then let's do a filter just to make sure that this worked out the way we wanted it to. So let's filter for the ones that say domestic. And for all of these, we should see United States of America here. So it says domestic here, it says United States of America here. So that means we got it right. Cool. So now let's break this all down and make an analysis based on the functions that we've learned. So I want to create a table here that shows the total cases, the average cases per day, the total deaths, and the average deaths per day. Okay. Let's drop that just to save some space. And then we're going to break that out by 2 factors. We'll do domestic and we'll do foreign. And we'll make a nice little table here, give it some cells. Okay. So now we're going to use the functions that we were working with earlier to break this down into a very simple data table that tells us what we need to know about what's going on here versus what's going on around the world. So total cases, if you remember, we're going to want to use our SUMIF because we want just the ones in the United States here. So the range is going to be our domestic column. So our test for whether they're foreign or domestic. Because we're looking at the United States, our criteria is going to be domestic. So put that in quotations and make sure it says domestic. And then our sum range, again, is going to be our cases because we're looking at the total number of cases. And so that gives us the number we had before, so 124,000 cases in the United States. Now what we can do is we can drag this down, and instead of SUMIF, we have all of our criteria here, right? So the domestic test column, and then the cases, and then the criteria. So now all we have to do is plug in the other function, which is our average if. So this is saying, take the average number of cases if the value in column L says domestic, okay? And so we see that here, the average number of daily cases in the United States is 1,300. And this has given us a decimal format, so let's actually get rid of that. All we have to do is come up here, and there we go. So now we want to see our total deaths. So what we're going to do, again, we can copy our formula from up here, so total cases. But actually, let's just run through it again to make sure that you're getting the idea here. So our total deaths, we're going to do equals SUMIF. Our range is going to be this column. Our criteria is going to be if it says domestic, and our sum range is going to be deaths. Okay, I'm running it. So that gives us a total of 2,191 deaths. And so now we just need to see our average number of deaths. So let's copy our average cases, our average if formula that we use for cases here. So just press Control-C, go down, hit enter. And then all we need to change here is you see we've got cases selected for EE. So let's just change that to FF, which is our deaths. And that should give us our average number of deaths in the US per day, which is 24, which again is very unfortunate. Hopefully we can get that number down soon. And so now what we can do is copy all of this over from domestic and move it to foreign. You're going to see there's going to be an issue here. So we'll look at it right now. We see that we get the zeros and the divided by zeros. So the reason for that being, so you can see in this formula, Excel has column E for cases and column L for the domestic test selected. And when we move it over a cell, Excel does the same, Excel does tries to kind of guess what we want to do here. So it actually moves the selection over one column. So instead of cases, it selected deaths. And then instead of the domestic test, it selected the column next to it because it thinks that that's what we want. So what we could do is we could go adjust these, but I want to show you a little trick that'll help you later on. So if we actually put a $ in front of these columns, and remember this is for our total cases test. So put the $ in front of the rows and the columns, and then copy it over. We see that it kept those values fixed. So that's what that $ does. And so the only thing that we have to change here now is we change domestic to foreign. And so we see that for the 124,000 domestic cases, there were 532,000 foreign or international cases. And so we'll do the same thing for all of our formulas over here. So we're going to add that $ to each of these just to make sure that our values are fixed. So I guess that now is a good time to explain kind of what's going on here. So remember, this is saying, so for example, for average deaths, it's saying column L to L. So this is saying just fix all of column L, fix all of column F, and then we're good. You can also use that for rows. But so we'll carry these over, just copy. And so we have identical values here. And we just need to change domestic for foreign. Again here, change domestic to foreign. We're almost done. Last one here. Okay. All right, so this gives us a breakdown now of how the US kind of stacks up to the rest of the world. So we see, total cases and deaths in the US on an average daily basis versus around the world. So now I guess let's look at how the US stacks up as a percentage. So US as a percent, we'll make a new field here and let's make it percent format and we'll put borders around it. And then all we do is we just do an equals. We'll take the domestic value. We'll do a /, which means divided by, and we'll select the foreign value. So we see that the US accounts for 23% of global cases. I think the US population is about 5% of the total world pop. So there's definitely a discrepancy there, and just, the US being kind of a leader. Dragging this down, we can see that the average number of new cases in the US is almost 2,000% that of the rest of the world. So we're growing much faster. Now we see that the total deaths, it's much lower than the total number of cases as a percent of total. So, that might lead us to believe that maybe the healthcare here is a little bit better, even if we're seeing more cases crop up. And of course, this is all just conjecture, but I'm trying to, get the idea across of how we can analyze this data and derive conclusions from tables like this. And then we see that the average number of daily deaths in the US is actually substantially higher, so 640%, which is likely linked to the total number of cases in the US. So I guess we could expect to see this 8% increasing pretty rapidly over time, since the US as a share of average daily deaths is really outpacing the rest of the world. Again, sorry for the morbidity of the data, but I think this is something that, is a good example of how we can kind of derive conclusions, and turn a lot of data into a very concise, little table that gives us a lot of information. So that was lesson 2. What we've covered as a recap is count, COUNTIF, sum and SUMIF, and then max, min functions, average, AVERAGEIFs, and of course the if statement, which is something that I'm sure you'll be using plenty in the future. Now in our next lesson, I think the big thing that we're going to want to cover is pivot tables, which are a really powerful way of kind of automating a lot of the work that we just did here and deriving conclusions from large sets of data in a very short amount of time. So stay tuned. We've got a lot of fun stuff headed your way.